Where the hell have you been? Everywhere I look, you're not where I need you to be. It's not my imagination. Now, where the hell do you go every day?
To the bathroom, sir.
To the bathroom. To the damn bathroom. For 40 minutes a day? What are you doing there? We're T-minus 0 here. I put a lot of faith in you.
There's no bathroom for me here.
What do you mean there's no bathroom for you here?
There is no bathroom. There are no colored bathrooms in this building or any building outside the West Campus, which is half a mile away. Did you know that? I have to walk to Timbuktu just to relieve myself. So, excuse me if I have to go to the restroom a few times a day.
Hello and welcome to another episode of ERG PowerTalk. I'm your host, Joe Santana. That scene that you were just watching right now is from the movie Hidden Figures, released in 2016. And in it, you see the actress Taraji P. Henson playing Katherine Johnson, who breaks down in frustration as she explains how she loses valuable work time each day running half a mile to use the only bathroom designated for Black employees. And this scene exemplifies how systemic inequities or obstacles weaken organizations by creating unnecessary barriers to efficiency, to innovation, and to collaboration. And unfortunately, most organizations, including many of yours, have the same obstacles hidden within them, because the systems and policies and the workplace culture were all designed around historical norms in the past in a time that overlooked or excluded certain groups of people. And these inequities persist and are often invisible to people who are not affected by them directly. Meanwhile, they cost organizations millions of dollars in unwanted turnover expenses, loss of business opportunities, and the loss of productivity from their workers. So what, if anything, can you do about it? That's the question that we're going to focus on today, and we have the perfect guest to help us with this. But before we introduce our guest, let's take a moment to review our mission and acknowledge our supporters. This is ERG Power Talk, and I'm your host, Joe Santana. The purpose of ERG Power Talk is to provide a virtual forum for the exchange of great ideas and inspiration for ERG leaders as well as others interested in supporting ERGs. With ERG Power Talk, there is no more waiting until the next conference and praying that you get the budget to travel to the conference to find great ideas and stimulation toward action. Just subscribe and listen at your convenience. Before we begin, a quick note of thanks to our supporters: Atrium Health, Freighted Health and Wisconsin Medical College, Hiscox, Lee Health, National Audubon Society, Tapestry, Oshkosh Corporation, UL Solutions, and Sony Pictures Entertainment. Now, let's go straight to the program. She is a distinguished equity strategist and cultural architect who partners with forward-thinking organizations and leaders committed to building equitable spaces. With a PhD in organizational leadership and an extensive background in diversity, equity, and inclusion, her expertise lies in identifying and addressing often invisible systemic inequities that can result in costly employee turnover, loss of business opportunities, and reduced workforce engagement and productivity. She's worked with top-tier organizations across multiple industries and uses data-driven approaches to assess and transform workplace culture. She helps organizations uncover and rectify these hidden disparities through her strategic guidance, fostering inclusive environments that drive sustainable business success.
Hello, I am Dr. Kerry Mitchell Brown. I am the founder of KMB Consultancy, where I specialize in equity, leadership, and optimization. Our services include strategic advising, leadership development, and cultural transformation. Joe, as you said it, my work is grounded in equity and care. I focus explicitly on Black women leaders, but not exclusively, while helping organizations foster sustainable inclusive cultures that encourage innovation and long-term success.
Kerry, thank you for joining us today on ERG Power Talk. I have a lot of questions for you, so I'm going to just jump right in. Tell us a little more about your work. When you go into an organization, what do you look for? What do you do? What do you find? And what do you advise them to do or do for them?
So at KMB Consultancy, we don't approach equity as an initiative. And so what I mean by that, Joe, it is central to all of our organizational transformation and leadership work. And I work with individuals, teams, and organizations. And so our work focuses on ensuring that organizations and leaders don't just talk inclusion, and there is a lot of talk, but design interventions and systems that function equitably. And so a significant part of our work also centers on Black women leaders who are often positioned at the forefront of change, yet lack the structural support to thrive. And so through senior strategic advising and a lot of leadership development, we help our leaders and organizations really transform cultures, driving towards optimal performance and long-term impact.
Those are all big benefits for the organization. One of the things that I want to talk about a little bit is the topic of the word equity itself, right? And the reason why is because this has become the big controversial issue of the day, with some HR organizations dropping the word and other people trying to reformat how they say this. And the reason for it is, that the critics of DEI often define equity in a really negative light as imposing quotas that unfairly disadvantage certain groups by favoring others, by forcing what they call equal outcomes. So one of the things that I've heard said and read about is where they say equality is about giving everyone the same start, but equity is about making sure that everybody gets to the same finish, regardless of their capabilities. Now, you and I know that's not true. It's a nice little word salad trick to make it sound like what we're doing is introducing unfairness or inequality into an organization. But I would love to have you define it in terms of how you see it, and just give us a simple definition and maybe an example of what this is and how we should think about it and why it's important to organizations.
You know what, Joe? We can spend our entire time on a war of definitions, and I know that we are not, but that's a strategy, right? Like, we can spend our time on being in war about what this means, what it doesn't mean, that we all get exhausted, that we can't do the work that is required. But really, equity isn't about handing out equal outcomes, right? It's about removing systemic barriers so that everyone has the opportunity to succeed. Joe, did you notice I said everyone? So not just a select few, or just Black people, or just women, or just LGBTQI folks, or those with recent immigration histories. That's everyone. So at its core, equity is about fairness and access and opportunities and resources. And then there's a tailoring to the unique needs of historically disadvantaged groups. So Indigenous people, Black people, Asian people, Hispanic people, women, and even poor folks, etc. So if we are all running a race, but some people start 10 feet behind the starting line due to structural disadvantages, equity ensures that they have the support needed to compete fairly, not to win the race, not to have an advantage that they don't deserve, but just to compete fairly. Now, many of us have seen that graphic, the graphic that I'm talking about, Joe, where there's one man in one lane and it looks like a woman of color in the other lane about to win the race, but the woman has so many obstacles in her lane, and the man is looking over in his talk bubble, what's the matter? You know the one that I'm talking about?
Yes.
Here's the thing. Organizations that really fail to grasp this understanding and practice that maintains this outdated structure, they really limit their talent pool. And what I'm talking about is this outdated understanding that we're just handing out equal outcomes or just unfairly giving people advantages that are underqualified or whatever. But failing to grasp the understanding of what equity actually is, this really limits the talent pool, innovation, and market growth, and they'll do so at their own peril. So again, at the core, equity is about fairness, access to opportunities and resources with the tailoring of the specific needs for those folks who have been disadvantaged structurally.
And when you put it that way and you think about it, then you realize if anybody should really want equity, even more than formerly underrepresented or disadvantaged people, it should be actually the company. Because why would I want to have employees that I'm going to hire where, let's say, for example, I have 100 people and let's say 50 belong to groups that were formerly and have always been well supported, and 50 belong to groups that, because of the needs they have, they're not as supported. Why would I want to have 50 people that are structurally set up to underperform? Right? As an organization, I want everybody at the top of their game. I want everybody to be able to perform. If I hire people that are disabled, I'm not going to bring them into the company and say, hey, look, you got to figure out how to read the screen, even though you're, let's say, blind. I'm going to get a screen reader because I want that person to be able to utilize the information that's there to provide the best. Give us other examples of organizations that you've seen, like where actually by taking steps to improve equity, they actually improve their ability to perform.
Equity isn't just about the right thing to do. It's a business imperative. You do not need half of your workforce underperforming on purpose, right? When you can actually do something about it. Because here's the thing, it drains down on resources and you produce underperforming. And there are huge benefits to society and historically disadvantaged groups when you actually do the right thing. So organizations that operationalize equity in their operations, at least 4 things happen, Joe. You boost innovation, improve financial performance, and enhance employee retention and productivity, and you expand market reach. And so what I mean by boost innovation, like diverse teams bring a range of perspective, leading to better decision-making and problem solving. We all know that. Research shows that companies with strong diversity and equity and inclusion strategies outperform their competitors. That improves financial performance. When employees feel valued and supported, engagement and performance increase, and it reduces costly turnover. If I'm showing up to work every single day and I cannot be accommodated for things that I cannot control, you will not retain me and I will not be productive. And again, all of this impacts market reach, right? So understanding and serving a diverse customer base ensures relevance in an increasing global market. And so if you're not making money, why the heck will you stay in business? You will be eliminated so fast.
And that takes me to the next thing I want to talk to you about, which is what about the costs of not having equity in an organization? I'm sure that you've run into organizations where when you walked in, you probably saw that there were probably a number of people in the organization that had an obstacle course of barriers in front of them to their performance. And just a personal example that I can share with you that I've run into is organizations where the turnover of women is a lot more rapid than the turnover of men, primarily because they don't have a good system for when women are going to go on maternity leave. So they tend to lose them around that childbearing age. They don't have a good system for when women come back after maternity leave. So the lack of an off-ramp and an on-ramp for maternity creates a larger amount of turnover. And in some organizations, that's millions of dollars in excess turnover from talented people who, if they stayed with the organization, not only would eliminate that multi-million-dollar hole, but probably would be a lot more productive. But I'm sure that there are other examples that you've seen in organizations in terms of what is the cost of inequity to organizations.
So, Joe, I worked with a multinational organization recently that had a high potential Black woman leader who had constantly outperformed her peers. But when a senior role opened, she was passed over. That still happens.
Right.
despite being more qualified because her leadership perceived her as not being quite ready. And I put that in quotes, not being quite ready. So this wasn't
Right.
about her performance at all. It was about comfort, unconscious bias, and really the lack of sponsorship. So what happened? She ultimately left the company. And you know what? She took her skills, her relationship, her institutional knowledge with her. You know where she went? To a competitor. The organization didn't just lose a talented leader, they had to restart their pipeline. They had to spend money recruiting externally. They lost momentum on the key initiatives that she led. And that's the cost of not anchoring equity into talent development and promotion systems. So you lose your future leaders and you often lose them to the companies that are more intentional about creating environments where they can thrive. And just think about all of the relationships with the younger, less experienced leaders, other Black women leaders or mentees that also looked up to her as well, who might have been thinking that this was a great company to stick out with and to grow. And so many companies are now beginning to also deprioritize their once touted equity efforts, which some were short lived because they were initiated during or shortly after the 2020 racial reckoning. And some of these efforts recently experienced market repercussions. So losing customers, talent, and even shareholder confidence. So we're back at this same cycle. Organizations that fail to recognize the cost of inequity will continue to see diminishing returns all across the board with talent, returns, and ultimately market share.
Yeah, absolutely. As we're looking at what's going on out there in the market and different organizations that have scaled back and others that they've changed the wording, but they're still doing the work, which I think is the most important thing, is doing the work. It's not the word salad that you use, it's the work. Organizations that are still doing the work and pushing forward, you're seeing dramatic differences in terms of their share values. Some of these
Yeah.
organizations that stepped back because they were afraid of boycotts or afraid of backlashes, boy, they were afraid of the wrong thing, because you could see right now, like the way that they're being impacted. And my next question for you is, as you look at the world around us becoming more diversified, becoming more global, clearly investor organizations, they care
Mhm.
about this stuff because they
Right.
know that the future value of their holdings is going to either increase or decrease depending on these decisions that are being made by these companies. And as you look at the global landscape right now and how organizations are becoming more globalized, if they're not already there, and they're becoming even more diverse, and so are their markets, have you in your work extrapolated a little bit of what this sort of workforce increase in diversification and marketplace diversification and globalization means for these companies that are stepping back versus the ones that are stepping forward?
We're seeing it play out in real time, right? Just think about so at the top of this conversation, you played the video clip with Katherine Johnson having to walk a half a mile to use the restroom, right? And at that time, one would say it was a civil rights issue. You talked about it very poignantly that it was a productivity issue. And we know those things around productivity still exist. We're in a global market. Legally speaking, workplaces have officially been desegregated for what now, 60 plus years. That's still within some people's lifetime that are still within the workforce, right? But there's still occupational segregation, especially when we even just think about like leadership roles, right? There's still some pretty significant gaps. There are still real barriers to advancements in the workplace, and that continues, and some predict that it's getting worse. Many organizations still operate under policies that were built decades ago that do not reflect today's workplace or workforce realities. You talked about some of them around parental leave structures, and even assuming that only mothers are primary caregivers, right? There's things around expense reimbursement policies that cover business meals but do not cover childcare for employees who are actually required to attend, like these business dinners or meetings during non-traditional work hours or childcare hours as a part of their function for work. We talked a little bit about promotion pathways and the lack of sponsorship, how sponsorship actually occurs. So that relying on informal networks and leaving those out of those direct access to executives and leadership so those things can actually happen. And so as workplaces are becoming increasingly diverse and globally connected, companies that do not modernize their structures and their practices and their policies will continue to struggle to attract and retain top talent. And so those are the things that come up for me, Joe, when I think about the relationship to globalization, the diversification of our work, and the importance of equity or the cost to organizations for not prioritizing equity.
You mentioned some things that we had in the conversation, I think a little bit before we actually started this program about a week ago, when you and I were chatting about doing this interview, and you shared a story about yourself. Can you share that story?
I had children a little late, a second time around. In my late 40s, I had twins. And when I had twins, I was working. I was actually commuting from my home in Chicago to Washington, D.C. And as a part of that commute, I was commuting with my twins, who I was nursing at the time. I was traveling with my twins, two nannies, and having to accommodate. My reimbursement from my employer was just for me. So all of the airfare, all of the accommodations was really out of pocket for my household. And after 2 years of doing that, it became a cost, and it came down to a hard decision that it was time to pivot to do something different. And that was because the policies were outdated. And I mean, there was just no longer work for my family.
I think that your situation is not unique. You have men too that have certain needs with families. In your case, you're a new mother and you've got to have this support system that you bring with you. And organizations set their benefits primarily in order to be able to attract and hang on to talented people. But they still think that what they have to do is tuition reimbursement program. These are the things that we pay for in terms of reimbursements for expenses for employees, because of course everybody has a stay-at-home wife who takes care of the kids. All these assumptions that are made by organization. Oh, and the nuclear family is the only type of family that exists everywhere. So you can marry a random person, that person, you can put them on your benefits, but if your brother needs to live with you, or your aunt or your mother or someone else, they're not qualified, because we're set up on the assumption that we're still living in the 1950s. And I think to your point, not only does that create obstacles now, but it's going to get worse.
It's absolutely going
further
to get
and further into the future. Okay, so here's what I got out of the first half of our discussion with Kerry. 1, it is vital to examine all your workplace systems, policies, and culture for outdated structures that do not fully support the performance of some members of your workforce. These barriers impact their efficiency and ability to be productive and can cost organizations millions in turnover and lost productivity. 2, the hunt for the opportunity to increase the support and performance of all the members of your workforce should touch every part of your your organization's operations and systems, whether that's leadership development, workplace culture, policies, practices, etc. 3, equity is not about forcing equal outcomes, as is often the accusation of DEI opponents. It's about removing unnecessary systemic barriers that exist within organizations due to norms of the past, so that everyone in today's modern workforce can adequately be supported in doing their best at their job. Companies that fail to grasp this will limit the talent pool that's available to them, and they'll hinder the performance of some of the members of their workforce. This stifles innovation and it limits their market growth. 4, companies that continuously improve the equity of their practices and policies secure benefits such as increased innovation, better financial performance, higher employee retention, and expanded market reach. And finally, 5, your company's equity efforts should always be the result of collecting and examining data that shows the long-term business impact and success of making certain changes to old, outdated policies and practices. This should not be an exercise in virtue signaling or PR showing that you're a good company, but rather an intentional effort that focuses on making your workforce the highest performing team. In the next half of our program, we will explore how ERGs can help their organizations meet their equity challenges and support the evolution of their companies toward becoming more successful in attracting and leveraging a 21st century workforce. All this and more when we come back, but first this. I'll see you on the other side. Are you an ERG group or committee chair struggling to balance your ERG activities with your day job responsibilities? Well, you're not alone. There are hundreds of thousands of passionate ERG leads all around the world that find themselves in the same boat. The only solution found by many is to give up lunch hours and personal time with family and friends. But there is a better way, and that better way is to master the powerful skills that enable you to 1, set realistic and achievable compelling goals and priorities. 2, distribute the workload by effectively delegating tasks and responsibilities to others. 3, communicate in a way that increases your impact with less time and effort on your part. 4, secure the full and active support of executive sponsors and other senior business leaders. And 5, fit your ERG leadership work into a reasonable set of time boundaries. And that and more is exactly what tens of thousands of your colleagues have learned to do effortlessly by participating in Supercharge Workshops. Supercharge Workshops was developed by us along the same easy and powerful how-to framework found in our popular Supercharge Your ERGs book. The modular, customizable programs are loaded with fun exercises and tools that will immediately give you back hours of time each day while increasing your ability to achieve high impact and measurable results in both your ERG work and your job. For more details on how you can schedule a Supercharge Workshop session in your organization, go to superchargeworkshops.com. That's https:// Supercharge Workshops, one word with no spaces.com. So don't suffer silently. Take that first step toward stopping your struggle today. Check out Supercharge Workshops. I'm going to pivot a little bit now to ERGs. So how can ERG communities help organizations address equity challenges? What are some of the ways that they can contribute to helping the organization get past their blind spots?
Let me say, I love ERGs. Like, some of my involvement earlier on in my career with helping organizations to address the challenges that we were facing. I participated in ERGs. I think they were called affinity groups back then, Black affinity groups, actually. So ERG communities are really critical in identifying and advocating for necessary change. The ones that I participated in very early in my career, they did just that, highlighted inequities. They drove policy changes, and they can drive policy changes. They create leadership pipelines, and they help to strengthen accountability. And so what I mean by that, Joe, is the ERGs can provide firsthand insights into the challenges that different groups face within the organization. So firsthand accounts and testimonies. And they can also share with each other, so they're not like isolated events and or incidents, that they can actually demonstrate that there may be patterns, that again, many of the policy shifts that improve workplace equity actually start with ERG advocacy, because there is some trends or that can be pointed to, and not like individual isolated events. ERGs helps to surface and to develop talent that might be otherwise looked at, where some sponsorship opportunities exist, where people that don't have an opportunity to get to know each other because they don't work together during the day-to-day. They have an opportunity to connect and to network in these ERG spaces. And then ERGs ensure leadership remains committed to progress, even when the DE&I efforts face external pushback, as we are seeing now. They're dismantling DE&I offices, eliminating or disinvesting in their funds, eliminating roles where ERGs have still been in place. And that's what comes to mind, Joe, around how ERG communities can help organizations. And like I said, I have witnessed it and participated firsthand in the amazing work of that ERG communities.
I totally agree. I'm a big fan of ERGs and BRGs and all these groups myself. I think that they're underutilized in many organizations, honestly. But we're going to talk a little more about some of the examples that you've seen shortly. But one of the things that I wanted to ask you about is, what are some strategies that ERG and BRG leaders can use in organizations where maybe unintentionally they've been given a lot of tasks to do that are basically performative for the organization? Prepare to celebrate this, the signature event over here, or do this. All these things that are meant to make the organization look really great and glitzy and so forth. And a lot of ERGs, they're comprised of people that have day jobs. So if they're so busy doing all this other event-focused type stuff, and they have all this other little busy work here, getting ready to celebrate a history month or whatever, they sometimes don't have the time to do some of the work that you're talking about, which is, I think, more of the meat. The women's group is really a great place to find out why you're losing women in an organization. The Black group is a good place to find out why perhaps you're losing disenchanted people from the Black community. And they're really great also for learning about what your clients think, especially if you're a consumer-facing organization whose clients kind of look more like their employees than they look like the leadership of the organization. But yet, these ERGs and BRGs in some organizations are not being used for that. They're being asked to put together a plan to get some funding. And in the plan, what they're looking for is that they're going to celebrate a history month, or they're going to do all this other stuff. In other words, busy work. Not that it's not important or of value, but a lot of that, when done to the extreme, or when that's their sole focus, I think detracts from being able to provide the kind of value that you're talking about. What are some of the things that ERG leaders and BRG leaders and these other group leaders can do to make sure that they do some of this stuff, but that doesn't become the sole thing that they do, and that they have the time and the focus on these other things that I think are more important to their community and to the organization?
One of the things that I suggest and that I have advocated for when I've worked with ERG and BRG groups as part of some organizational transformations work is to create like a charter for the group, and to have some guardrails on how much of the celebratory work that they would do, and build a strategy around the group to establish a leadership team within the ERG. And just like you would any business unit within the organization, and run it like that, and make sure that there is funding, that there are meetings and agendas and notes and progress, and checking in with whoever is sponsoring and holding executives accountable for representing and supporting the group. And when this is done, ERGs have helped their organization to really address some pretty significant policies and practices within the organization, pick up projects or take on projects that have been plaguing the organization, things that have come out of their employee satisfaction survey that they can help to take on to resolve or intervene.
So what I'm hearing from you is that either new ERG leaders or existing ones need to look at that charter document that basically says this is what you're here to do and this is how you're going to do it, and make sure that there are some substantial things in there and not just party planning and stuff like that. Even though, again, I don't want people to get the wrong idea. I don't think that the celebratory stuff is bad.
I think it's important. I think it's important too, but it can't be the majority of the work.
Or the only thing that the group does, or the only thing, because then the group is being used more as window dressing and it's not really being allowed to do anything substantial. Totally agree. You've talked about organizations that you've helped to address equity issues. Can you give us an example of a case where you leverage an ERG to do that?
I've worked with 2 organizations as a part of some organizational strengthening work. And one organization that I worked with was a tech company that successfully advocated for paid caregiver leave. So extending beyond the traditional leave for welcoming a new child. This wasn't only just caregivers for expanding family. They were actually caregivers for elderly parents and disabled family members, and there were no benefits for that. And so this ERG group of caregivers, they worked to ensure equitable benefits for employees who did care for elderly parents or disabled family members. And it took some time to do, but they were committed and not doing a whole lot of celebrating. But they were committed in working with the executive team, and the executive team working with them to do some benchmarks with other like tech companies and other companies within the area. And they were able to push forward a paid care leave policy. Another company that I worked with was a finance company, and they pushed for salary transparency policies. And again, this particular company, as a part of their window dressing for Women's History Month, they would always run these celebratory things on women in finance and tout all of the great things that they did for women. And at one point, this ERG called the question around the pay gap, and it took them about 18 months, but they did push for salary transparency policies, which helped to actually close the gender and the racial pay gap to ensure that employees had some visibility into compensation structures. And so that was something that the ERG group did as a part of their celebratory work, in just calling the question around what are we like celebrating, or can we have something to celebrate in addition to just acknowledging the amazing women that came before us and what we are doing. Can we also celebrate that we are getting closer and closer to doing the right thing around compensation? And so I would say, Joe, that these 2 successes demonstrate that ERGs are not just helpful with the social spaces or places where people can go to collectively complain, which is some of the bad rap that ERG and BRGs get sometimes in organizations, but as business assets that drive meaningful change.
Those are great examples. And one of the things I want to emphasize is that we're talking about this from the standpoint of equal pay for women, and we're talking about this as a policy change that benefited a community. But the big beneficiary is the company,
It's
because those types of
absolutely.
policy changes reduce turnover, they increase productivity, they increase how much full-time equivalency
It
output you
benefits
get from
everyone.
every person, right? So
Hmm.
there is a business benefit to this as well. This is not charity work that the organization is doing because they want to be a good company. This is stuff that they're doing because if they're smart, they know that this makes them more competitive. One of the other questions I wanted to ask you is the intersectional piece of this, and more
Oh,
specifically,
yeah.
intersectional equity, right? Because there are people that live at the center of more than one identity. So most ERGs are set up in such a way that they focus on a particular social identity. So you have the Black ERG, you have the women's ERG, you have the veterans ERG, and you could have the disabled ERG, right? Or you could have the other abled ERG. And yet, in a company, you could have a number of people that are, and you could have the LGBTQ ERG. Let's add that in. You could have a woman who is LGBTQ, who is a veteran, who is disabled and is Black. So now that person sits at the center of five of these elements. What are some of the ways that ERGs can help?
So, intersectionality. So, the term coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, I love her, someone who I admire and have studied her scholarship at great lengths. It just means recognizing that no one exists at just one identity, right? You described it well. Black, woman, member of the LGBT community with accessibility needs, also a veteran, which comes with unique workplace challenges individually and then compounded. And so ERGs can address intersectionality, equity by collaborating across groups, developing intersectional programming, and advocating for systemic flexibility. And so, what I mean by that, Joe, is creating partnerships between ERGs to advocate for policies that support multiple identity employees, which means like most of us, right? And hosting events and leadership programs that reflect a layered experience of their members and ensuring that policies are not one size fit all, but meets the diverse employees' needs. And when ERGs take intersectional approach, they foster a truly inclusive workplace and ensures that they do not negotiate out the people who need the support the most.
Great point. Solve the multifaceted problem, and you've solved a lot of the single social issue problems as well. So, Kerry, what resources do you recommend listeners of the program who want to learn more about equity and how they can help drive it? What are some of the things that you would say would be good sources of information for our listeners to explore?
So when I think about books, I would say for ERG leaders specifically, I recommend a book called The Business of Belonging by David Segal, which outlines approaches for community building that delivers measurable impact. There's also another book by The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker and provides innovative approaches to creating meaningful connection, even with limited resources. And we're all working on limited resources every day. There's a book that I've been reading, Minda Hart's book, The Memo, What Women of Color Need to Know How to Secure a Seat at the Table. It provides valuable insights and actionable advice for understanding the unique challenges facing Black women leaders and strategies for success. And then there's a couple of podcasts that I listen to regularly, the Brown Table Talk and NPR's Code Switch, which I think are great. And then there's something that I used to read quite a bit when I was early supporting ERGs or involved with affinity groups that still exist today, the Conference Board ERG Leadership Resources, And there's research by the Executive Leadership Council, which I think is pretty important. And then I do a lot of work and research still that I post on LinkedIn and resources on my website.
Last question. How can our listeners reach you?
My website is Kerry, Kerry, MitchellBrown.com. I'm on LinkedIn, and on all social media handles is Dr. Kerry M. Brown. You can find me there. I believe deeply in the power of connection and community, so I encourage listeners to reach out, whether you're seeking guidance, collaboration opportunities, or simply want to continue the conversation that we started today.
Excellent, Kerry. Thank you so much for joining us again today on ERG Power Talk.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for the invite.
Okay, here is what I got out of the second half of our discussion with Kerry. 1, ERGs as representatives of various communities and organizations are in a unique position to help their organizations to identify obstacles that prevent their community members from being as productive as possible. 2, ERGs should document any trends or patterns of obstruction that exist within the organization to help their organization spot opportunities to increase engagement and operational efficiency. 3, to provide this vital service to their organizations and communities, ERGs must go beyond History Month celebrations and other types of performative window dressing and advocate for real workplace improvements. 4, while cultural celebrations are useful morale boosters, ERGs should ensure a significant portion of their work focuses more on driving meaningful change that impacts workplace policies and employee experiences. 5, if to date your organization has focused you on running support events, you may want to revisit and redo your charter. Use this as an opportunity to discuss with your executive sponsors and other stakeholders why it will benefit the organization and the community more for you to provide feedback to your organization on how your community is affected by current policies and practices. And finally, 6, the bottom line is to make sure that your ERG focuses on initiatives that are vital to your community and organization, such as pay equity, caregiver benefits, and other improvements that enhance the productivity of your entire workforce, reduce turnover, and strengthen the company's competitive edge. As Elizabeth Warren, the senator from Massachusetts and a former law professor, once said, "If you don't have a seat at the table, you're probably on the menu." For ERG leaders, this is a crucial reminder that your role must go beyond organizing events and celebrations. You must be active participants in helping shape policies that impact your communities. If you're not advocating for workplace improvements, identifying barriers, and presenting data-driven insights to leadership, decisions will be made without your input, and they may not serve your community's best interest, or for that matter, your organization's best interests. So now is the time to reassess your ERG's focus. If your organization has limited your role to cultural programming, use this as an opportunity to revisit that charter and engage with executive sponsors on a new direction. Shift your efforts toward driving meaningful change and enhance workplace inclusion and productivity. Make sure that you claim your seat at the table, or you risk having decisions made for you that don't reflect the needs of your community or the best interests of your organization. Thank you for tuning in to ERG Power Talk. If you enjoyed and got value out of this program, please like us and leave a favorable review at your podcast provider's site. Also, invite others to listen to the show. By the way, contact me if you're looking for an ERG Symposium keynote or a leader for your strategy workshop, new chair onboarding, and or ERG bootcamp. I can run these for you either in person or in a virtual setting. Also, for more great ideas and tips for your ERGs, get my books, Supercharge Your ERGs, 18 Tips to Power Up Your ERG/BRG Strategy, and the new DEI and ERG Frontier, how you and your efforts can rise and thrive in the new world of constant disruption. Both available on Amazon.com. I'm Joe Santana. Thanks again for tuning in.